Chapter 5. Tuesday night came soon enough, and before the appointed time, Steele was waiting at the meeting point. The place was a well-known club on the corner of two main roads near the night markets. Hardly a place for a gang to meet before travelling to an illegal deal, but it was local knowledge that Jimmy owned this club, and most of the clubs in East Point. He was standing in the shadows at the corner of the building, where an alleyway disappeared into darkness to his left, and, at his other hand, the sidewalk led up to the main doors of the club. The rain was pouring down, but that had done nothing to deter the nightgoers that were lined up under the sidewalk shelter, waiting to be let into the building. Music pumped from within, pressing on Steele's temples and giving him a headache. The noise increased every time the doors opened, and the voices of those waiting were filled with excitement. Although it was just the beginning of the week, there were a lot of people waiting to gain access to the nightclub. Co-workers going for drinks together made up the bulk, their professional attire giving them away among the younger crowds. Steele sighed, checking his wristwatch again. He had been 10 minutes early, but already he had been waiting for nearly 20. The traffic on the main road was still heavy despite the hour, and car horns blared through the falling rain. The headlights of the cars and lights of the city caused the raindrops to sparkle and the puddles to glow. Fortunately, he was in the cover of the sidewalk overhang from the building, and the rain was falling with no angle. The main front of the storm had gone across Eden hours ago, and what remained was just a steady depression, filling the gutters with water. For the last several days he'd been making plans and trying to get a better understanding of the situation in the city. Initially he had felt hesitant about the agreement he had made with Jimmy, but now things seemed better, as he felt he had a better grasp of the problems. Knox had helped in this, though he had not overtly done anything. Steele suspected that his friend had gone to speak with Clara about the impending deal without telling him. Not that he really cared. Knox was capable of doing what he wanted, without looking for permission. When Steele noticed Reeves' men had stopped following him, it also confirmed another suspicion he had. It helped a great deal in making him feel more comfortable with going along with Jimmy. The most concerning thing he had come across was a complete lack of information about Sovereign. There were no facts about this rival for the company, only rumours. As far as Steele could see, Sovereign was an unknown entity in the city's crime rings, and that made things hard to predict. He could make guesses on what he knew, but he never liked to do that. Headlights from the alleyway to his left drew his attention as a trio of large cars came towards the main road. The first in line stopped at the mouth of the road, and the driver's window slid down. "You, Steele?" the driver asked quickly. "Hurry up and get in the back." The bald and tattooed man did not wait for a reply, winding his window back up as soon as it finished, and Steele did not bother making a response. With a steadying breath, he moved from the shelter of the sidewalk through the falling rain and into the back seat of the large SUV. The car was full, but no greetings were made as he sat down and closed the door. The driver took off almost immediately, aggressively pushing his way into the traffic and nearly causing a crash. In the front passenger seat, Steele spied Jimmy, smoking a cigar, but as for the others, he did not recognize him. "Reinhardt Steele," a young man about Steele's age at the other end of the back seat said, leaning forward to look around the bulky man sitting in the middle. "I didn't believe Jimmy when he said you'd join us, but here you are." "I haven't joined you," Steele replied simply. "After this job, we go our separate ways." The younger man, rather thin and weaselly looking, scoffed angrily and shook his head. "You always were a prick, weren't you?" The comment was more than a statement than a question, so Steele did not say anything. "You remember me, right?" "No," Steele lied. He had recognized the man as soon as he had seen him. "It's me, Frankie," the young man sneered, his eyes flashing dangerously in the lights through the window. "Jimmy's younger brother. I owe you a broken arm. You know, my elbow still aches like hell on rainy nights like this." Steele did not say anything and dismissively looked out the window. "Hey, jerk!" Frankie roared. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. I'll kill you." "Enough, Frankie," Jimmy shouted over his shoulder. "Leave it for another time. We need him at the moment." "Like hell we do," Frankie argued. "Me and Jules here are 10 times better with our fists than this prick. Frankie motioned to the bulky man sitting in the middle of the back seat. "If those mainlanders start anything, we'll flatten them," Frankie continued. "Me and the rest of the crew." "I told you to shut up," Jimmy yelled, and Frankie slumped in the seat, lowering his eyes as he glared at Steele. "Neither side are bringing guns to this deal, as agreed, so we need all the best hand-to-hand fighters in the group. Steele here took out 5 of our best by himself. Now, we need this deal if we're going to screw Clara, so sit there and keep your trap shut." Frankie grumbled something under his breath, catching Jimmy's eye. "What?" Jimmy snapped. "You got something to say, boy?" "Nothing," Frankie grumbled. "What?" Jimmy demanded angrily. "I said nothing," Frankie yelled back. "Damn right you said nothing," Jimmy threatened. "You ain't got the balls to challenge me, so you do as I say, got it? Talk back to me again and I'll cut off those tiny testes myself." A heavy silence fell out of the car and Steele hid his smirk well as he continued to stare out the window. "Damn it all," Jimmy said with a great deal of exasperation. And winding down his window, he threw out his half-finished cigar into the gutter. "Now I'm in a bad mood. You're always such a rash idiot, Frankie. I try to teach you the right ways, but it's like you don't even listen. Too busy getting high and rooting fat bitches and learning." Frankie did not reply, continuing to sulk in silence. "What was this about no guns?" Steele asked curiously, unconcerned with Jimmy's temper. "That's how we're doing it," Jimmy snapped. "Mainlanders have plenty of guns, but Eden has hardly any. We both agreed not to bring the firearms to the deal." "Okay then," Steele scoffed, his derision obvious. "Of course we're bringing, though," Jimmy snapped. "What do you think I am, an idiot? Boys with the guns will hold back, waiting if things go south. I'll bet the mainlanders do the same. But as for us at the deal, we're not holding. I brought in metal detectors to make sure those shifting mainlanders are sticking to the agreement as well." "I don't see how you're in position to dictate terms," Steele said seriously. "They want this as much as we do." Jimmy glanced over his shoulder at Steele. "The company sourced from other mainland syndicates through that bitch, Clara. These guys want a taste of Eden's market, and we want to undercut Clara's slice of the cake. Simple as that." "What is the deal for?" Steele narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "You'll see," was all Jimmy said. "I told you that if I don't like it, I'll just walk away," Steele said flatly. "If you do, you'll find a bullet in your back," Jimmy replied, his voice dark. "The moment you punched my boys in that alleyway the other day, you were in this. You try and leave, I'll kill you." "I'll do it myself," Frankie spoke up eagerly. "Just like I did that police snitch not too long ago. Guess what I did to him?" Steele did not say anything, ignoring Frankie completely, and causing the man to lose his temper once more. Again Jimmy was forced to quieten his brother, but Steele paid it no never mind, his thoughts elsewhere as he continued to look out the window. Jimmy's threats were no concern to him, but the information that there was a bullet waiting for him if he walked from this deal did make things complicated. It was not that death scared him, but it could mess up his plans. Death was always a risk, of course, and one that he had grown to overlook. It was the rules of the game, but like all games, such risk could be minimalized. And like all games, there was a way to manipulate the rules in one's own benefit. This game was the one of life, and there was a very fine line between manipulating the rules and cheating. Steele had no intention of cheating. Those who did always ended up losing. As Steele pondered the new developments, he had noticed that they had driven into the docks and warehouses off the southern end of East Point. This area was well known to be Clara's turf, so Jimmy was taking an even bigger risk meeting the mainland dealer in this area. The traffic lessened and the street lights became fewer. Only the rain stayed constant, drumming on the roof of the car and against the windscreen. The mood inside the car became more tense as the minutes wore on, and as the car slowed, Steele glanced over his shoulder and out of the back window. But the rest of the entourage had pulled away, stopping in the shadows with their lights off as they waited on edge for a signal to come to the aid. Slowly the driver continued through an open gate into an empty warehouse yard. Only a few orange lights sat on the sides of the buildings, throwing deep shadows into the rain. The open doors of the large warehouse stood gaping like some beast, and swallowed them whole, stealing the rain. From what Steele could see, in the dimness of a few hanging lights, the warehouse was empty, and at the far end another large door opened out onto the wharf. A car was waiting inside the open doors, parked beneath a single lantern that caused the rain outside to shimmer. Half a dozen dark shadows stood beside the car, waiting for them to stop and get out. "Remember to keep your mouth shut, Frankie," Jimmy said as they got out of the car and walked to greet the people waiting. Someone turned the lights on at their end of the long warehouse, taking away the shadows across the faces of the mainlanders. Steele thought he recognized one of the members from a martial arts tournament years ago, but the man's face was deeply scarred, so he could not be certain. "Mr. Pierce," the man said. In the middle of it, half a dozen mainlanders greeted politely, though his eyes were suspicious. "Mr. Anderson," Jimmy replied in a similar tone. "I hope you don't mind." Jimmy motioned to the bulky man, Jules, who took out a handheld metal detector and walked over to the mainlanders. "Of course," Mr. Anderson smiled, turning to give a nod to a gangster Steele thought he looked familiar. "You won't mind if I do the same?" "Go ahead," Jimmy said. "We bought no guns." As Jules checked the mainlanders, the man with the scarred face ran a similar-looking metal detector over Steele and the others. All was clear, and neither party had broken their agreement. "You have the money?" Mr. Anderson asked seriously, once the check for firearms had been performed. "Yeah, nearby," nodded Jimmy. "You got the stuff?" "On a boat, just offshore," Mr. Anderson replied. "The Coast Guard here is not as good as they think." "Well, all right then," Jimmy smiled. "How do I know it's a real thing?" "I'm no amateur," Mr. Anderson chuckled, taking off his glasses and wiping the lenses. "I bought samples, of course." The mainlander motioned to another of the associates, who entered the car and took out a briefcase, which he brought over to his boss. "This was harder to get into the island." Mr. Anderson smiled as he opened the case. "Come, have a taste." "Frankie," Jimmy nodded to his brother. With a rub of his nose, Frankie pushed his chest out like he was some important businessman and swaggered over to Mr. Anderson. From where he was standing, Steele could see the contents of the briefcase and clenched his teeth irritably. It was coke, a popular and expensive drug. Not as addictive or life-destroying as many of the other drugs, but he had never wanted to be involved in this kind of deal. From the beginning, he had suspected that this was the deal for drugs. Previous comments about undercutting Clara virtually confirmed it. This was a time when he had planned to walk out if the deal had indeed been for drugs. Whatever Jimmy was going to pay him, be damned. But glancing over his shoulder to the other end of the warehouse, he suspected Jimmy had placed snipers in the shadows. A loud snort as Frankie inhaled the white powder through his nose brought Steele's mind back to the present situation, and he watched as the younger Pierce rubbed his nose and turned his face towards the ceiling. "Yeah, it's good," Frankie said after a few seconds. "Top grade." Mr. Anderson smiled wide and closed the briefcase, and Jimmy nodded happily. "Hey, Elliot," Jimmy said, turning to the driver. "Make the call." "Jordan," Mr. Anderson said to the man who took the briefcase from the boss. "Call in our boys, too." Phone calls were made, and Steele looked to the falling rain outside with boredom. Of course, Jimmy claiming that he wanted Steele here for support had been a complete lie, and it had been some ploy to try and coerce him into Jimmy's crew. Steele was starting to wonder why he even bothered. Hopefully the pay at the end of this small-time deal would be worth it, but if his predictions were accurate, they would not be anywhere near adequate. The sound of another car echoed through the warehouse as one of the other vehicles in Jimmy's entourage came and stopped. Only the driver was in the car, and once he got out, he took out 2 briefcases from the back seat and placed them on the ground next to Jimmy before returning to the car and driving off again. As the car disappeared into the dark night, Steele caught the sound of a boat approaching, and out on the water, within the light of a lantern, a single speedboat appeared. The engine was cut, and the boat drifted along the wharf, where one man got out and tied the boat off. The other one in the craft grabbed the cases in the back and hopped out before the pair hurried through the rain. The cases were placed on the ground and open for Jimmy to see the contents. dozens of sacks of coke. With a nod more to himself, Jimmy opened his own 2 cases and showed Mr. Anderson the reams of paper notes. "Excellent," Mr. Anderson smiled wide. "This deal has been most beneficial, Mr. Pierce, for both of us, I think. I look forward to future exchanges." "As do I," Jimmy returned a smile and motioned to Jules to grab the cases of coke, just as Mr. Anderson instructed his man to collect the money. Jules had barely closed the lids of the 2 cases and picked them up when a large group of heavily armed thugs came through the doors and from the shadows of the warehouse. They must have already taken care of Jimmy's backup, although they had done so very quietly. "Not so fast there, boys." A woman with a deep scar, in the shape of a cross on her face, came into the light. In each hand she carried a semi-machine gun, which was aimed at both Jimmy and the mainlanders. "What the hell is this?" Mr. Anderson demanded furiously. "Good question," Jimmy said, his eyes fierce as he glared at Clara. "The hell do you think you're doing, Clara?" "That's my question, Jimmy, you greedy bastard," Clara sneered. "You're making deals for coke on my turf with these weasels from the mainland. Who do you think you are? East Point drugs are my business. You've got the night markets and all that's north of the freeway. Did you really think you could succeed here? You really are an idiot. If you weren't an associate, I'd put a bullet in your head." "You told me that the company agreed to this deal," Mr. Anderson snapped angrily. "Shut up," Clara said dismissively. All the while they had been talking, Steele was searching for a way to slip into the shadows. He had not been surprised by the turn of events, and now was a perfect time to get away before things really got complicated. As he looked about the members of Clara's group holding guns, his eyes locked with the blue orbs of a familiar face. His heart seemed to leap into his throat as he looked upon Farron for the first time in many years. Knox had been right. She was still very attractive. Farron recognized him as well, and her mouth fell open slightly, a look of shock coming to her features. He offered a slight smile, guessing the thoughts that had suddenly filled her mind, and she quickly looked away. "Grab the cash and coke," Clara ordered her crew, causing Jimmy's face to turn red with anger. "We'll be taking both as compensation for this affront." Jimmy looked as if he was about to start screaming when the sound of police sirens broke through the drum of the rain. "Cops! How the hell?" Frankie cried. Clara looked similarly surprised, and she gritted her teeth angrily. "Scramble! Drop the coke in the water! Hurry!" Steele took his chance and took off from the scene, sprinting into the shadows of the warehouse. The darkness was suddenly stolen as the lights were turned on and the police cars streamed from the other end of the warehouse. Gritting his teeth, Steele skidded to a halt and looked back towards the wharf, noticing the flash of many lights on the boats of the Coast Guard. He suspected that this was the reason Reeves had called back the tale he had put on Knox and Steele. Sometimes he hated being right. Jimmy and his crew raced for their cars, and the mainlanders did likewise, leaving Clara and all her associates to ditch their guns and make a run for it. But the police had already cast the net, and the whole group would be caught, save for a few lucky ones. Steele could see that he would not be one of the fortunate ones, so with a heavy sigh, he stopped looking for an escape and waited patiently for the police to arrest him. This was the other reason he had wanted to leave the party earlier, and the reason Jimmy's threat had made things much more complicated. As the police wearing riot gear and brandishing firearms charged in, cutting off all escapes and arresting everyone in the warehouse, Steele did not resist. A slight smile came to his face as he noticed one of the unmarked cars pull up and Detective Reeves climb out. Their eyes met instantly, and Steele offered his hands towards the officer to be handcuffed. "Why am I not surprised?" Reeves said unhappily, lighting up a cigarette as he approached Steele. "Same reason I'm not," Steele replied with a glint in his grey eyes. Reeves was not impressed, and roughly slapped his handcuffs on Steele's wrists before shoving him in the back of a police car.